The dense forests of Nagaland whispered with the rustling of ancient trees, their leaves murmuring secrets of old. In a village nestled between rolling hills and sacred rivers, a young hunter named Rohit lived a simple but contented life. He was known for his sharp aim and unwavering kindness, his heart attuned to the rhythms of the land. Though many admired him, Rohit yearned for a love that felt as boundless as the sky above him. One evening, as he ventured deep into the forest in search of game, an unfamiliar melody reached his ears. It was unlike anything he had ever heard, soft, haunting, and laced with an otherworldly beauty. The sound beckoned him forward, drawing him to the edge of a shimmering lake that gleamed beneath the full moon. A sight both wondrous and surreal unfolded before him. A group of ethereal beings stood at the water's edge, their figures draped in garments woven from light and mist. They moved in a dance that defied the weight of the earth, their feet barely touching the ground as they twirled under the moon's silver gaze. Rohit's breath caught in his throat when his eyes settled on one among them. She was unlike any woman he had ever seen. Her skin glowed with the faintest golden hue, her dark hair cascading like a waterfall of night. Every movement she made was poetry, every glance a whispered promise. His heart pounded as he stepped closer, barely daring to breathe. The fairies laughed, their voices ringing like wind chimes in the night. But the moment his foot brushed against a dry leaf, the laughter ceased. In the blink of an eye, the figures scattered like mist in the wind, disappearing into the shadows of the trees. All but one. She remained, her luminous eyes locked onto his, neither afraid nor angry. Instead, there was something else in her gaze, curiosity. A gust of wind rushed between them, lifting a single piece of delicate fabric from the ground, a fragment of her garment left behind in her haste. Rohit instinctively caught it, his fingers brushing against the impossibly soft material. The fairy's eyes widened as she reached for it, but Rohit hesitated. He did not know why, but some deep part of him knew that if he returned it now, she would vanish just as the others had. He clutched it tightly. The fairy's lips parted as if to speak, but she remained silent. Instead, she cast him one last lingering look before turning and dissolving into the forest's embrace. Rohit stood frozen, the fabric still clutched in his hands, its texture unlike anything crafted by mortal weavers. He felt the weight of something he could not name settle over him, an invisible tether binding him to the stranger he had just encountered. That night, as he lay in his humble home, the fabric safely tucked beneath his pillow, his dreams filled with visions of the mysterious woman. He saw her walking along the lake's edge, her bare feet skimming the surface of the water as if it were solid ground. He heard her voice, though the words were distant and unclear, like a melody carried away by the wind. The longing in his chest deepened, an ache he did not understand. When morning arrived, he could not shake the feeling that his fate had shifted in ways beyond his comprehension. He spent the day lost in thought, his tasks completed with absent-minded precision. By nightfall, he found himself drawn back to the lake, though he could not say what he hoped to find. The air was thick with silence, the water still, yet a presence lingered. Then, like a whisper on the wind, she appeared. The same woman, standing across the lake, her expression unreadable. But there was no fear in her stance, no sign of anger. Slowly, she stepped forward, the moonlight tracing the delicate lines of her face. "You have something of mine," she said at last, her voice carrying the weight of distant stars. Rohit exhaled, his grip tightening around the fabric. "I do." She studied him, her gaze searching. "Why do you keep it?" He hesitated, the words forming before he could stop them. "Because if I return it, you will leave." A flicker of something crossed her face, surprise, perhaps even amusement. "And if I stay?" Rohit swallowed, his pulse a drum against his ribs. "Then I will know you." A silence stretched between them, heavy yet unspoken. Then, for the first time, she smiled. It was brief, fleeting like a passing shadow, but it was real. "My name is Lungyanu," she said softly. Rohit committed the name to memory, feeling the weight of it settle into the core of his being. I am Rohit. Lungniyanu looked toward the fabric still held between his fingers. You do not understand what you have done. Then help me understand, he replied. She sighed, something both resigned and gentle in the sound. If I stay, it must be by my own choosing, not because you hold what is mine. Rohit hesitated before extending the cloth toward her, but before she could take it, he made a silent plea, a hope he did not dare voice. If she took it and left, then perhaps this was nothing more than a fleeting dream. But if she stayed, Lungniyanu reached forward, her fingers brushing his as she accepted the fabric. The air between them hummed, charged with something ancient and unspoken. She did not disappear. Instead, she stood before him, the barrier between their worlds thinner than it had ever been. Tomorrow, she said, meet me here again. And with that, she was gone, fading into the night like mist. Rohit remained, his heart caught in the space between hope and something far greater. Days turned into weeks, and each evening, Rohit returned to the lake, where Lungniyanu would be waiting. Their meetings, once tinged with hesitation, grew into something deeper, a quiet understanding, an unspoken bond. She spoke of the hidden realms where her kind lived, of rivers that shimmered with liquid moonlight and trees that whispered the names of the wind. Rohit, in turn, told her of his village, of the rhythm of the seasons, of the simple joys found in human life. Their love grew in the sacred space between their worlds, delicate yet undeniable. When Rohit finally asked for her hand in marriage, Lungniyanu hesitated, her gaze searching his face as if measuring the weight of his words. She did not answer at first, only looking past him toward the vast night sky. Then, with a breath as soft as a sigh, she agreed, but with one condition. You must never ask where I go at night, she said. You must never try to follow me. The request puzzled him, but his love for her was greater than his curiosity. Without hesitation, he promised. Their wedding was unlike any the village had ever seen. Though Lungniyanu did not invite her own kin, there was something otherworldly about the celebration. Flowers bloomed where her feet touched the ground. The air itself seemed to hum with unseen melodies, and the torches burned with a golden light that flickered with an unnatural glow. The villagers, entranced by her beauty and the mystery that clung to her like mist, whispered among themselves. Some believed she was a blessing, a gift from the spirits. Others, more wary, muttered about things not meant to walk among men. But Rohit heard none of it. His world was Lungniyanu. Her laughter, her touch, the quiet moments when they sat beneath the stars, saying nothing at all, yet speaking in ways words could never convey. Their life together was filled with happiness, though Lungniyanu remained different from the other women of the village. She never aged, her skin untouched by time, her beauty as luminous as the first day he saw her. She carried an air of mystery that even love could not fully unravel. Yet she was a devoted wife, and, as the years passed, her presence brought prosperity. The land flourished, the harvests doubled, and the village thrived as never before. Still, as the seasons changed, so did the whispers. Some villagers, fueled by suspicion, found it strange that Lungniyanu never bore children, that she never joined the women in their daily gossip or rituals. But most of all, it was her disappearances that unsettled them. Each night, when the moon rose high, she would leave without a word, slipping away like a shadow. She would always return before dawn, her face unreadable, her lips holding secrets that no one dared question, no one but Rohit. At first, he fought the urge to ask, remembering his promise. But doubt is a seed that, once planted, takes root in the deepest corners of the mind. He tried to silence it, convincing himself that love meant trust, that some things were not meant to be known. And yet, as the years passed, the seed grew, winding its way through his heart like a creeping vine. One night, when the questions burned too fiercely, he could no longer contain them. As she prepared to leave, he reached for her hand, his grip firm yet pleading. "Where do you go, Lungniyanu?" She turned to him, her expression unreadable, though something flickered behind her eyes, something close to sorrow. "You gave me your word," she said softly. The weight of her gaze pressed against him, but the doubt within him had grown too strong. "I did," he admitted, "but I did not know how much it would torment me." Lungnianu held his face between her hands, her touch as gentle as the wind before a storm. "Then trust me once more," she whispered. And just like that, she was gone, slipping into the night like mist over water. Rohit lay awake long after, staring at the empty space beside him. The shadows in the corners of the room stretched long and restless, mirroring the unease in his heart. When the silence became unbearable, he made a decision, one that, in that moment, felt as inevitable as the rising sun. He would follow her, slipping out into the cold night. He moved through the forest with the careful steps of a hunter. The moon hung heavy in the sky, casting pale light over the world as he traced Lungnianu's path. She walked with a grace that seemed almost unearthly, her form barely disturbing the leaves beneath her feet. Rohit stayed hidden, his pulse quickening with each step she took toward the lake. Then he saw it. At the water's edge, where they had first met, Lungnianu stood motionless. And then, as if called by an unseen force, she stepped forward onto the surface of the lake. But instead of sinking, she remained upright, walking across the water as if it were solid ground. The air shimmered around her, and before his eyes, she began to change. Gone was the woman he knew, the wife he had held close. In her place stood a creature of radiant light, her form shifting between the world of the mortal and the divine. Her hair floated as though caught in an eternal breeze, her skin glowed with the light of the stars, and her wings, great, shimmering, and impossibly delicate, unfurled from her back like the petals of a celestial flower. Rohit's breath caught in his throat. The truth was undeniable. She was not of this world. In that moment, as if sensing his presence, Lungnianu turned. Her luminous eyes met his, and he knew, she had known he would follow. A sorrow deeper than words filled her gaze, and though no words were spoken, he understood. The promise he had broken could never be mended. The trust they had built, so carefully woven, had unraveled with a single step. Slowly, she began to fade, her form dissolving into the night. Rohit rushed forward, his voice raw with desperation. "Lungnianu, please." But it was too late. The woman he loved, the fairy who had once chosen to stay, was gone. And all that remained was the empty hush of the forest, the whisper of the wind, and the echo of a love lost to the tides of fate. The nights after Lungnianu's departure were heavy with silence. Rohit remained by the lake, unwilling to move, his heart an empty vessel adrift in the dark waters of regret. He called for her, whispering her name into the wind, but no answer ever came. The stars above, once filled with wonder, now seemed distant, indifferent to his sorrow. He returned to the village a different man. Where once he had been strong and full of life, he was now a ghost of himself. His eyes, which had once shone with the warmth of love, were hollow, shadows lingering in their depths. The villagers, who had once whispered about his mysterious wife, now spoke of him with quiet pity. Some said he had angered the spirits, others believed he had been cursed. But no one dared ask him what had truly happened. The land, once flourishing under Lungnianu's presence, began to wither. The fields, once lush and golden, grew barren, and the river, which had always run clear, turned murky. It was as if the world itself mourned her absence. Still, Rohit could not bring himself to leave the home they had built together. Each night, he waited by the threshold, hoping against hope that she would return. Seasons passed, and the pain of loss settled deep into his bones. Yet, even as time moved forward, he refused to forget. He searched for stories of those who had encountered beings like Lungnianu, traveling far beyond his village to find answers. He met old storytellers who spoke in hushed tones of the ones who lived between worlds, of fairies who walked among men but could never truly belong. Some told him there was no way to call her back. Others claimed that only through a great act of devotion could a lost love return. It was this final hope that drove him. If trust had been broken, then perhaps it could be restored. If love had been severed, perhaps it could be rekindled. With this thought burning in his heart, he made a decision. On the anniversary of the night he had lost her, Rohit returned to the lake where it had all begun. The air was thick with mist, the moon casting silver light over the rippling water. He stepped forward, his voice steady despite the tremor in his heart. "Lungninu," he called, his words barely more than a breath. "I have waited for you." There was no answer, only the soft rustle of leaves. "I broke my promise," he continued, sinking to his knees. "I let doubt steal what we had, but I have spent every day since longing to undo what I have done." A single tear fell into the water, disappearing into its depths. The wind picked up, swirling around him, carrying whispers he could not decipher. Then, as if the night itself had taken pity on him, the lake shimmered, its surface shifting like liquid moonlight. And then she was there. She stood across the water, just as she had the first time they met, her form radiant yet distant. Her eyes, filled with sorrow and something softer, held his. Rohit held his breath, afraid that if he moved, she would vanish once more. "Why have you come?" she asked, her voice like the wind through the trees. "To make amends," he said, "to prove that my love for you was never a mistake." She studied him for a long moment, and though there was no anger in her gaze, there was something else, a quiet sadness, the weight of knowing things could never be as they once were. "Love is not enough if trust is lost," she said gently. "I know," he admitted, "but tell me, is there nothing I can do to earn it back?" Lungninu hesitated, and for the first time, uncertainty flickered in her eyes. Then, with slow steps, she approached the edge of the lake. "Would you give up everything to prove your love?" Without hesitation, he said. The wind whispered between them, carrying a choice Rohit knew he would have to make. He had spent years regretting the moment he had broken her trust. Now he had a chance to prove that his love was more than words. She reached out her hand, her fingers glowing with the same light that had once seemed so untouchable. "Then come," she said softly. Rohit did not hesitate. He stepped forward, and though his feet should have sunk into the water, they did not. The lake held him, shimmering beneath his steps. He walked toward her, each movement slow, deliberate, as if the world itself had slowed in reverence to this moment. When he reached her, she looked up at him, and for the first time in years, she smiled. And then the light swallowed them both. The villagers searched for him the next day, but there was no sign of Rohit. Only his footprints remained by the lake's edge, leading into the water before disappearing. The people whispered of spirits, of love too great for the mortal world to contain. Some claimed to see two figures on the water when the moon was full, a man and a woman, their forms shimmering like the stars. As the years passed, the legend of the boy who married a fairy became a story passed down through generations. It was a tale of love, of loss, and of redemption, a story that warned of the weight of promises, of the cost of broken trust, and of the lengths one would go to for love. But for those who believed, it was more than just a story. It was a reminder that somewhere, beyond the veil of the ordinary world, love could still endure, even if it belonged to the realm of myths and whispered dreams.